This is Edward October, host of OctoberPod on YouTube. Hear that jingle jingle? It could be Kris Kringle, or a home invader looking for an open window, a jilted lover looking for revenge, or a disgruntled coworker hoping to spike your eggnog with arsenic. The girls of our true crime podcast are always on Santa's nice list, but the crimes they discuss are very naughty indeed. Listener discretion is advised.
Hi, Jen.
Hey, Cam. Happy last day of our 12 Nightmares Before Christmas.
This is it.
I know.
This is it.
It's kind of sad. We are closing out 2022 as we speak.
Every year goes by quicker. That's all I got to say about that. It's terrible.
I know.
It really does.
I know. And I hope this is going on. This will air, I guess, on Christmas Eve.
Christmas Eve.
I hope
December 24th.
Everybody is celebrating Christmas or the holidays. With their loved ones or with people you can tolerate.
I was just going to say, or people you don't like. It's okay. We all have that. There's all a couple of those people that show up at the holidays. Come on now.
Just put in your headphones and listen to the
Smile
sweet,
and nod.
sweet sounds
Smile and nod.
Our true crime podcast.
There you go. And let's go.
Are you ready?
Wait. This is going to be a terrible one. I know it's 12.
It is. It's actually more than 12. Just a big content warning. This contains domestic abuse, incest, harm and cruelty towards children, sexual assault, all the stuffs. Ready?
I'm ready.
In the small town of Cloudcroft, located in the mountainous region of New Mexico, rumors began to surround a 17-year-old girl named Sheila Simmons. It was 1981, and most 17-year-old girls would be excited for things like watching music videos on the newly watched 24-hour music's channel MTV, reading teen magazines, dressing in the latest fashion trends, and taking over the landline to chat with each other about their day and other important things. But Sheila's reality was tragically much darker. Shy, ashamed, and threatened into silence, she finally admitted her secret to the school counselor after much pressure. She was pregnant. Once more, the father of her unborn child was also the baby's grandfather.
Oh.
40-year-old Ronald Gene Simmons.
Oh. Sorry.
I know. That's the feeling everybody should get when they hear his name. When he learned he was being investigated by authorities, Simmons felt betrayed. In a letter discovered almost a decade later, he warned his daughter, quote, "You have destroyed me, and you have destroyed my trust in you. I will see you in hell." Little did anyone know, things would only get worse from that moment on. Ronald Gene Simmons was born in Chicago, Illinois on July 15th, 1940, to parents Loretta and William. Not too much is known about the first few years of Simmons' life, but when he was 2.5 years old, his father William died of a stroke. His mother soon remarried a civil engineer, William D. Griffin. As the new head of the family was part of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, they moved frequently since Griffin was relocated by the Corps according to their needs. Initially stationed in Little Rock, Arkansas, they migrated around the state until Ronald turned 17 in 1957. That's when he dropped out of high school. He dropped out to enlist in the U.S. Navy and was immediately stationed halfway across the country at the Bremerton Naval Base located in Washington. This would be where he met his future wife, Bersabe Rebecca Ulibarri, or otherwise known as Becky, at the United Service Organizations dance, USO. Becky was raised on a cattle ranch with several siblings in Walsenburg, Colorado, and she and one other sister, Viola, would be the only siblings to leave Colorado as a result. Simmons and Becky married on July 9th, 1960, after being transferred to Raton, New Mexico. Simmons' career in the Navy was short-lived, but then he joined the Air Force in 1965 and spent the next 22 years of his life in service there. During this time, he and Becky had 7 children together: Ronald Gene Simmons Jr., William Sr. II, Sheila, Loretta, Eddie, Marianne, and Rebecca. And by the time he retired, Simmons had achieved rank of Master Sergeant and had also been heavily decorated, receiving a Bronze Star, the Republic of Vietnam Cross, and the Air Force Ribbon for excellent marksmanship for his efforts. Between his time in the Navy and Air Force, Simmons tried his hand at being a banker, but soon realized that the career wasn't for him. That's kind of like you. You tried to be a banker.
I did.
Yeah.
It was short-lived, let me tell you.
Very short-lived. Math is hard. But, as is often the case, what sounds like it was a successful life and career was only surface deep and covering something rotten to the core. At first, Becky's siblings had thought Simmons would be a caring husband due to the preconceived notions about how a man in his career should behave. They quickly saw things begin to turn sour. When Simmons was stationed in England in 1973, he physically and emotionally abused his wife. Ronald was also incredibly controlling. Becky had to ask him for every little thing, even stamps. Her sister Edith Nesby said that all 7 of their children would try to protect their mother during the beating she endured, but didn't have much success. It's horrible.
Absolutely.
Edith also told the LA Times that Simmons wouldn't allow Becky to maintain contact with her family. Quote, he censored her mail. He wouldn't let her have a telephone, and he'd stand there if she ever made calls from somewhere else. Simmons, in fact, opened every piece of mail in the house and would supervise any outgoing messages as well. Viola O'Shields, another sister who Edith claimed kept most contact with Becky, made it clear that Becky knew her situation wasn't right. She had even gone so far as telling O'Shields that, quote, if anything ever happened to her, O'Shields was to take custody of her children because she feared Simmons would turn his violence on them. Following the birth of their 7th child, Rebecca Lynn, Becky pleaded for her husband to let her have an operation to prevent her from having any more children due to life-threatening complications in the final pregnancy. Simmons hated this and said he saw it as a challenge to his authority, but reluctantly agreed to the procedure and quickly moved on to someone else that he had quite possibly always desired over his wife. One of Becky's brothers, Abe Ulibarri, said that his sister's awful situation reached a new low when Simmons began molesting and then impregnating their teenage daughter, Sheila. I will have you know that Sheila was the spitting image of her mother. Like, hard to tell them apart. There's a picture of her, Becky, and Sheila on Sheila's wedding day, and they're identical. Sheila's abuse may have started when she was as young as 15 years old, according to her mother's family, and it seems that locals were aware something strange was happening in that household. It didn't go unnoticed how he treated Sheila, calling her his little princess and spoiling her over her siblings. He would also kiss her goodbye when she left for school and kiss her in a way that those around them considered inappropriate. And this was even before she became visibly pregnant and officially admitted to her father's abuse. It's just gross.
No words, man, no words.
District Attorney Stephen K. Sanders told the LA Times that authorities initially learned of the incest from school friends of Sheila, who she had confided with, and her older brother, Ronald Simmons Jr., who informed local social services. At the time, Gene Jr. and his siblings had been told of the pregnancy by their father, and he was so incredibly happy in his announcements, and his wife and children were absolutely horrified. They had been threatened with keeping this a secret, but Ronald Jr. had reported it nonetheless out of fear for his sister. DA Sanders went on to say, quote, we had a lot of trouble prosecuting the case because the daughter refused to testify against her father before the grand jury. We actually had to threaten her with a contempt of court citation. Eventually, she did testify and Simmons was indicted. He was charged with 3 counts of incest on August 11th, 1981. It wasn't until 1983 that Simmons relented and the family settled 15 minutes from the town of Dover in Pope County, Arkansas. They secured a 13-acre plot of land to live on, but the living conditions of Mockingbird Hill, as the residents became known, were just a little bit more than squalor. Isolated and remote in the area of dense woodland, The Simmons' so-called home on Mockingbird Hill was actually little more than 2 old mobile homes haphazardly combined into one. Isolated also seems to be how Simmons wanted it, based on the no trespassing signs he placed all over the driveway. They had no telephone access, although a line was in place to have a phone. Simmons never allowed it to be connected. And the only mode of communication they did have access was the mailbox in the driveway, which also went mostly unused due to Simmons's control. The yard was filled with various forms of junk apparently meant to be used for building materials, including several self-deconstructed cars. This was surrounded on all sides by a privacy fence, which came up to 10 feet tall in some areas, and was built with cinder blocks and barbed wire. Simmons made the children build this using some pieces from his own personal junkyard. Potentially worst of all, the property didn't even have indoor plumbing. And bear in mind, this so-called home initially housed 6 children and 2 adults. Gene Jr. and Billy had already been married and left the household, which brought the number down to 8, and this would soon dwindle to 4 children as Sheila left with her daughter Sylvia. Due to the lack of plumbing, the family had to use outhouses, and cesspits had to be dug to dispose the family's waste. Simmons often ordered his children to do seemingly pointless labor around their yards, and one of these tasks included forcing the children to dig at least one of these pits. Horrifyingly, this will become relevant later in this case. Somehow no red flags were raised, and nobody noticed that there was anything amiss with the Simmons family. Although the children were never allowed to visit school friends or have them over, and didn't even go to school functions, this wasn't considered worthy of alarm by the community. The children had good attendance and achieved decent grades, and perhaps surprisingly, despite their lack of plumbing, they were often clean. There was nothing to raise any question that thinks, yes, teachers and everybody are supposed to report, right? First thing if anything goes wrong. There was nothing. It was at the same point after their move to Dover that Sheila managed to make her escape. She confessed to her father that she was in love with Dennis McNulty, a fellow student that she had met while studying at a business school in Little Rock, and he was well aware of who the father of Sheila's child was. Simmons wasn't pleased, but he couldn't stop them, and Sheila and Dennis married in September of 1984, moving away to Dennis's hometown of Camden, Arkansas. Sheila took her daughter Sylvia with them, and they would go on to have a son together by the name of Michael. Sadly, when Sheila left the household, Simmons would turn his attention to another one of his daughters, Loretta. The middle child of 7 siblings, she managed to ward off her father's advances, but her life quickly became miserable. In letters she snuck out of the house to her friend Karen, she admitted to being depressed and said she would, quote, rather be dead than go on this way. And she had even admitted to having attempted suicide by taking an overdose of pills. Loretta's best friend was the only person allowed to stay over at the Simmons house and commented that Ronald Simmons would always have a beer in his hands and stay in a single small room in the house that was dark and smelled vile. During a short vacation in 1984, Gene Jr. brought his wife, Wilma, to visit the family at Mockingbird Hill. Separated during the events of this case, Wilma told AP News after the fact that Simmons Sr. often stayed in his room alone to avoid contact with his family. She also said that she was, quote, the only person in the house he would talk to for the duration of their stay. According to Loretta, her mother, Becky, had also begun to try to leave Simmons, saving up any money she could for a divorce. She was also seen by friends and acquaintances in the area with bruises on her arms and face, and although she was beaten down and fearful of Simmons due to her long years of abuse, she was beginning to find her bravery. Becky snuck letters out to her son Billy and also her sisters, and there she confirmed that she would leave her husband thanks to support of those in her family outside of the Simmons household. She even told Simmons to his face that she could report him to the police.
Oh.
In a letter to Billy and his wife Renata in December of 1987, Becky told him, quote, I am a prisoner here and the kids too. I know when I get out, I might need help. Dad has had me like a prisoner, and the freedom might be hard for me to take. Yet I know it would be great having my children visit me anytime, having a telephone, going shopping if I want, going to church. Every time I think of freedom, I want out as soon as possible. Can only imagine. And to have to stay there, just to feel stuck there would be...
Well, knowing that if she left, then he's still...
It could be horrible for everyone involved.
But it ended up horrible anyway, so...
Becky also told Gene Jr. that she would leave over Christmas, taking the kids to finally claim their freedom. In the meantime, Simmons had spent his time in a nearby town of Russellville, hopping from job to job and working for little pay. The Encyclopedia of Arkansas states that he left the company of Woodland Motor Freight, where he worked as a receivable clerk. He left after, quote, numerous reports of inappropriate sexual advances by two other workers.
He's disgusting.
These advances had repeatedly attempted to pursue a relationship with 24-year-old Kathy Kendrick. He even showed up on her doorstep on more than one occasion. She reported this to her boss, Joyce. I hate this. Joyce Butts. Her name's Joyce Butts.
That's okay.
So just laugh now.
I know. I got it out. I'm okay.
Okay. She reported this to their boss, Joyce Butts, who reprimanded Simmons. He found this incredibly emasculating, as not only did he have to answer to a woman who ranked above him, but he was being punished by the same woman, and he could not respond due to her position of authority.
I knew when you said it was a woman. I knew that's what he would. Yep, I knew it.
After quitting Woodland Motor Freight, Simmons then worked at Sinclair Mini Mart until he suddenly quit on December 18th, 1987. All right, so this is when it starts getting bad. It's not clear what triggered the following events. Maybe Simmons somehow lost control over his family, or perhaps he realized Becky was about to leave him for good, or worse, tell the police of his crimes. Or maybe it was a long-term financial problems that he'd been suffering from. It could have been any number of these things that would set him off and lead to what would become the worst mass murder in Arkansas history and the worst crime involving one family in the U.S. history. On the morning of December 22nd, 1987, Ronald Gene Simmons purchased a .22 caliber pistol from Walmart on his way home from dropping his younger children off at their school bus stop. Their oldest son, 27-year-old Gene Jr., was visiting for Christmas with his daughter, Barbara. He was asleep when Simmons Sr. came into the room and began to beat him around the head with a crowbar, waking him up during the assault. He tried to defend himself, but his father shot him 5 times, killing him. Then, Ronald turned his attention to 3-year-old Barbara Jean, whom he killed by strangling the little girl. Ronald then proceeded to murder his wife Becky by shooting her in the head, and it isn't clear whether she was beaten with a crowbar during the assault. Becky was only 46 years old. Afterwards, Simmons sat down with a beer and waited. The younger Simmons children were all at school, oblivious to the horrifying things that were happening back at home. One teacher, Margaret Neely, received a Christmas card from Loretta telling her that she was the best teacher Loretta had ever had. Margaret would later remark that Loretta was the perfect student. Loretta was an honor senior who had taught Spanish every morning to the children at the local elementary school. When Simmons's 4 younger children returned from school, he told them that he had special presents for all of them, but he had to give them to them separately. He sent all but the oldest, Loretta, to their rooms to wait as he took Loretta outside. One by one, he would call the children out and strangle them. Loretta was the first. He then drowned them in a rain barrel that was used to collect water on the property. The 4 children had been aged 17, 14, 11, and 8. Simmons took the bodies of Becky, Gene Jr., Barbara Jean, Loretta, Eddie, Marianne, and Rebecca and dumped them in the cesspit that he had forced his children to dig not long before. So it's not really certain whether he ever intended the pit to be used for their outhouse. He then covered their bodies with various junk from the junkyard, such as corrugated tin and barbed wire. This was an attempt to deter animals and to cover up the smell. And Simmons also poured kerosene into the mass grave. Over the next few days, Simmons continued to comfortably bide his time alone, drinking and watching television, much as he spent most of his other days, to be honest. He briefly left the house to visit nearby Sears and check if the gifts he ordered for his family had arrived.
Why would he be doing that?
I don't know. These included 2 watches, a hairstyling kit of some kind, a large box of children's books, and multiple games. Otherwise, he was just content in staying at the home where he had murdered 7 of his family. 7 members of his family, just waiting for the rest to come. They had long planned for the children, who had since moved out, Gene Jr., Billy, and Sheila, to visit over the holidays. Since only Gene could make it there for Christmas Day, the others would visit for a big family dinner the day after Christmas. That would be December 26th. Billy, his wife Renata, and their young son William, also known as Trey, arrived around noon. Simmons welcomed them into the home and directed them into the dining room. And it's there that he shot both Billy, 23 years old, and Renata, 21. And after making him witness the murders of his parents, he strangled their little boy Trey, who would have turned 2 only 4 months later. Wasn't even 2 years old. Next to arrive were Sheila and her husband Dennis, along with Sylvia, the baby born of Simmons' rape, and her little brother Michael were all together. Sheila was brought into the dining room, and her father shot her to death before she even realized what was happening. Dennis was shot coming through the door, probably hearing the gunshot and coming to check on Sheila. Sylvia, a witness to all of this, ran and hid from her grandfather, but he found her and strangled her to death. And unfortunately, their baby brother suffered the same fate. Sheila was 24, Dennis was 33, Sheila was 7, and Michael was only a month older than his cousin Trey, at 21 months old. Sheila had only been free of her father's tyrannical abuse for just over 3 years. Poor thing. All of these, it's horrifying. I know I say that. It's just
but sometimes there's no words. You don't, like, what can you say?
It's possible that all 3 Simmons grandchildren were also drowned in the rain barrel, as the others had been only 4 days before. Simmons moved Dennis and Sylvia's bodies into the dining room alongside Sheila, Billy, and Renata. He covered the bodies of his children-in-law, son and daughter/granddaughter, in their own coats and some bedding. He placed Sheila on the dining room table and draped his deceased wife's favorite tablecloth over her, a vile way of favoring her even in death. The 2 youngest, Trey and Michael, were hidden in the back of 2 junk cars in the yard, wrapped in green garbage bags. And yet somehow, Ronald Gene Simmons still wasn't finished. Ronald spent 2 days drinking and watching television in a home inundated with the bodies of his murdered family members before he drove back to Russellville in his son Gene Jr.'s car. After stopping off to buy a second gun at the same Walmart he bought the .22 pistol, he parked at a building used in part as offices for the law firm of Peel, Eddy, and Gibbons. Simmons had found out that this is where his ex-coworker, Kathy Kendrick, the one that he was doing those unwanted sexual advances for, he found out that she was now working there as a receptionist and legal secretary. Brenda Jones, who had been sitting in the waiting room as Simmons entered, reported what happened from here. She said he walked into the building and approached the reception area. Kathy Kendrick asked him, "Can I help you?" right before he shot her 4 times in the head. Chillingly, he didn't say a word, even as he turned to give Barbara Jones a look as he left the building. His next target was a previous place of work, the Taylor Oil Company. Russell Rusty Taylor, Simmons' ex-boss from the Sinclair Mini-Mart, was present, and Simmons shot and wounded him. A Taylor Oil employee approached, and he shot him too. This victim, J.D. Chafin, was killed instantly. He was 33 years old. Simmons shot at another employee on his way out of the building, but this shot missed its mark. Other employees quickly called the police, but Ronald was already headed to another place of employment, the Mini-Mart itself. There he shot and wounded 2 workers, David Sowler and Roberta Woolry. The bullet hit David in the head and Roberta in the face and shoulder. And again, Ronald just simply walked out the door. Roberta was able to call the police and identify the attacker, but couldn't tell them where he had come from or where he was going next. Perhaps unsurprisingly, following the trend, his final stop was the Woodline Motor Freight Company, where he had worked with Kathy Kendrick. Ronald Simmons found Joyce Butt, the woman he believed had emasculated him by being his boss, and he shot her in the head and chest. Incredibly, she would survive this vicious attack. This entire rampage took the course of 45 minutes. Clearly deciding he was finished, he turned to another former co-worker, Secretary Vicki Jackson, and ordered her to call the police at gunpoint. As she made the call, he calmly left his weapons on her desk. Ronald had the nerve to ask her why she didn't visit him after he left Woodline. Before he surrendered to the police, he said to her, quote, "I've come to do what I wanted to do. It's all over now. I've gotten everybody who wanted to hurt me."
I don't even know what to say.
Simmons met the police with silence, refusing to cooperate with them after the arrest. Officers sent to search his home and check on his family's safety found first the 5 bodies in the dining room, then uncovered 7 buried under the junk in the cesspit, and the 2 youngest victims that were hidden in the trunk of old cars in their yard. All told, he had killed 14 members of his own family and 2 ex-colleagues, and seriously wounded 4 others. AP News reported, quote, Russellville Police Chief Herb Johnson filed information accusing Simmons of 2 counts of capital murder and 4 of attempted capital murder stemming from the shootings. They went on to add that the case prosecutor, John Bynum, formally filed 2 capital murder charges and 4 attempted capital murder charges for the shooting spree in Russellville, and that he intended to further charge him on the murders of his 14 family members. During questioning by the police, Simmons maintained his silence, but he did speak to his court-appointed defense attorneys, John C. Harris and Robert E. Irwin. The attorneys stated that they would file motions to suppress information about the deaths at the Simmons home in his first trial because that evidence was found without any search warrant. Nice, huh? Ronald was sent to the Arkansas State Hospital in Little Rock for an evaluation of his mental state and was found sane, competent, and capable of standing trial. On May 12, 1988, in the Franklin County Circuit Court, Simmons was convicted for the murders of Kathy Kendrick and J.D. Chaffin. 4 days later, Judge John Samuels Patterson sentenced Simmons to death by lethal injection, plus 147 years in prison. Early in the next year, Simmons' second trial took place for the murder of his 14 family members. On February 10, 1989, in the Johnson County Circuit Court, again with Judge Patterson presiding, Simmons once again was found guilty of capital murder. In this trial, Prosecutor Bynum presented a possible motive to the court when he produced a letter detailing some of the relationships between Simmons and his daughter Sheila. When the judge ruled this letter admissible as evidence, Simmons punched Bynum in the face and unsuccessfully lunged for the handgun of a nearby deputy. Yep. Ronald was restrained before being removed from the courtroom in chains. He's such a nice guy. There's asshole doesn't even cut what he is, right? I mean, just
no. And I would say mentally ill, but I don't think he's mentally ill either. They tested, They had somebody look him over. They said he was sane. Simmons was again sentenced to death by lethal injection on March 16, 1989. In both trials, he waived all rights to appeal. After sentencing, Simmons made the following statement under oath. Quote, I, Ronald Gene Simmons, Sr., want it to be known that it is my wish and my desire that absolutely no action by anybody be taken to appeal or in any way change the sentence. It is further respectfully requested that this sentence be carried out expeditiously. Going on to say that his attorneys had tried to encourage him to appeal, but that in this case, quote, anything short of death would be cruel and unusual punishment. However, Simmons' time on death row was prolonged against his wishes when ongoing legal proceedings necessitated a stay of execution. Reverend Louis Franz, a Catholic priest responsible for counseling inmates under the Arkansas Department of Corrections, petitioned the Supreme Court of Arkansas for permission to appeal on Ronald's behalf as, quote, a next friend. A next friend is someone who appears in court in place of another who is not competent to do so, usually because they are a minor
or are considered incompetent. He was rejected for this motion because he had no proof that he had any sort of relationship with Simmons, which that's just crazy. I mean, I get that he's like a man of the cloth, a Catholic, and probably is against the death penalty. But to do that, when the guy obviously doesn't want that to happen in the first place.
And he obviously did it.
Right.
He makes no bones about that.
A fellow inmate on death row, Jonas Whitmore, also filed a suit against the state of Arkansas, both for himself and Simmons. He also claimed to be making this appeal as Simmons's next friend alongside Reverend Franz. Together, the two claimed that Simmons's refusal to appeal his death sentence jeopardized the rights of other death row inmates to appeal their convictions and would constitute cruel and unusual punishment, which the U.S. Constitution is supposed to prevent. Whitmore wanted Simmons to get an appeal because he believed that if Simmons went under appeal, that his murder of a single elderly woman would look less brutal and more exempt from the death penalty. So he had reasons for doing this. During this time, Simmons apparently had to be separated from the other prisoners on death row as they constantly threatened his life for the same reason Whitmore filed an appeal. They feared his lack of appeal for some reason would negatively affect their own chances of having a successful appeal. This Supreme Court case, known as Whitmore v. Arkansas, was thrown out for several reasons, largely amounting to the conclusion that Whitmore's claims had no basis in law or truth. Because of these legal proceedings, Simmons was given a stay of execution. Its initial date was March 16, 1989, and in fact, he found out about it while he was in the middle of what he believed to have been his last meal. And he was watching television at the time, and it came in that he got a stay of execution.
They didn't tell him first? That's how he learned?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. He was eating his last meal, watching TV, and breaking news. There's been a stay of execution. Ronald Gene Simmons. Yeah, that's how he found out.
Unbelievable. Seriously.
But then, not long after, on the 31st of May, 1990, Governor and future President of the United States, Bill Clinton, signed the second execution for Simmons. And according to the Encyclopedia of Arkansas, he was to be executed on June 25th, 1990. It's the quickest sentence to execution to death time in U.S. history since the death penalty was reinstated in 1976. Simmons refused any and all visitors during this time on death row, including legal counsel and clergy members. The only exception he made was for KTHV reporter Ann Jansen, who Simmons believed looked like his daughter Sheila.
Ew.
Creepy. He wrote to Ann on Sheila's birthday, and she was allowed to interview him on multiple occasions. Ann said later that he was paranoid, thinking that his prison cell was bugged and that no matter what, he would not give her a reason for murdering his entire family. To this day, the only indication anyone has of why Simmons committed these murders is what he said on the day of the Russellville rampage. The quote, "I've gotten everybody who wanted to hurt me." How exactly 2 infants under the age of 2 and 5 of his own children under the age of 18 achieved this, or could have achieved this, is anyone's guess. Ronald Gene Simmons Jr. was, in the end, executed by lethal injection on the scheduled date of June 25th, 1990, becoming the first Arkansas inmate to receive this fate. None of the surviving family members ever claimed his body, and he was buried in a pauper's grave in Lincoln County.
I have lots of words, but I'm not going to say them right now.
There's a TV show I watched on this, and I guess a friend of the family, they went to visit him, and they asked him why he didn't kill himself.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, well, you saw how many times I had to shoot my family. I wouldn't have died, because he used a .22, which aren't very powerful.
Yeah, but
he would have made him a vegetable.
In the head.
No, not necessarily. It could have, not necessarily. Depends. But he didn't want to not kill himself. He didn't want to be left in a vegetated state.
I have words, but I'm not gonna.
He's
I'm not gonna.
Bitch. I mean,
I'm not gonna say anything.
He was evil to the core. Seriously, utterly evil. And he was mad his wife was going to leave him, and if he couldn't have his entire family, nobody was going to. He punished the entire family.
Unbelievable.
And others.
I know. He sat there and he drank and he horrible.
And with them there in the house or in the backyard. That's a terrible human being.
Babies. Teeny tiny.
He had it in his. He was mad at his wife, and that was it. He just was. He was mad that
Sheila left him. He was. Yeah.
I can't believe Sheila came back to his house for the holidays. No. I'm kind of surprised about that.
I know. She must have done it just for her mother.
That's what I was thinking.
But still, and the husband, even Dennis, to let her come back. Seriously, when he knew. Dennis knew the whole thing.
Mm-hmm. The whole baby story. That they had. Yep. Unbelievable, Jen. And that concludes our 12 nightmares before Christmas. Today is Christmas Eve, and we will be,
It concludes our entire 2022. This is the last episode we're doing of this year. We will not be back until January 11th. We are working on a project with our friend Edward October for October Pod VHS. So not really sure when that's going to drop, but it will be dropping on our feed, so it might come earlier. So you might get us before January 11th. There'll be us and some more podcasters, but it'll drop on our feed, so you'll be able to hear it.
Super cute. I love it. Also, just a giant thank you to all of our listeners who have stuck by us for 4.5 years. Many of those years were not the best of podcasting, if you will. Took us a while. Still taking us a while, but we thank you from the bottom of our hearts for always being there for us and giving us a shout out, giving us a positive review, telling a friend about us, anything and everything. All that is because of you. So we're still here.
And we also want to
here.
And I also want to have a big thank you for everybody that helps our true crime podcast be what it is. And those people are Kira Ackling, Jesse Hawk, Elaine McFarlane, Loretta Allen. They've all helped me right throughout this year, which has been a huge help for me mentally. Also, huge thanks to Edward October from October Pod VHS. He's been with us since almost the beginning. He does our listener discretion and our intro. Hear that jingle, jingle. That's the amazing Edward October. And then also Nico Vertese. He is the Vertese. Is it Vertese?
Vertese. There you go.
Vertese, or just Nico, as we call him. He is what makes us great. From We Talk of Dreams.
We Talk of Dreams.
Yes.
At We Talk of Dreams, his company.
But I was going to say he is what makes us as good as we are. He did our theme music. He does all the editing. He does the sound, because we all know Camille's so much louder than Jennifer. Mm-hmm. But he is, if it wasn't for him, I doubt if we'd even be where we are now. So
giant thank you to all those folks.
Thank you to everybody.
Hope Santa is good to them this year.
I'm sure they will be. Or I'm sure he will be, I should say.
You could go by they. We don't know.
We don't know.
We don't know.
But anyway, thank you, everyone.
Thank you. I'm picturing credits rolling right now.
I know.
And the music's about to
thank my parents for making me possible.
Music's going to send us. Music's coming on to cue us to leave. But anyway, until we see you in January 2023, may you and all your loved ones have a great holiday and be safe, have a blast, get good stuff, and then
to contentment or past contentment.
We will see you in January 2023. Until then, remember, lock your doors.
Keep passing by those open windows.
Bye-bye.
Love ya. Merry Christmas.
Happy holidays.
To you.
Happy holidays.
To you.
Happy holidays.
To you.
And there you go. All right. Bye. Love you, mean it.
Love you.
Today's episode was researched and written by me, Jen. For more information about this episode, as well as all other sources, please check out our show notes or the podcast website at ourtruecrimepodcast.com. Our True Crime Podcast is developed and created by the hosts, Jen and Cam. Original music and audio mix of all our True Crime Podcast episodes is courtesy of Nico Vertese from We Talk of Dreams. You can reach Nico at wetalkofdreams.com. Listener discretion is provided by Edward October from OctoberPod VHS. You can find all of his great works on YouTube. Please make sure to like and subscribe to our True Crime Podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts. We can be reached on Instagram and Facebook at Our True Crime Podcast or on Twitter with the handle at Our True Crime Pod. You can also email us at ourtruecrimepodcast@gmail.com. We would also at this time like to thank our patrons. We would be so lost without you. Thank you so much. And if you would like to help support the show, you can check us out on patreon.com/Our True Crime Podcast. You can also show your support by leaving a 5-star review on Apple or simply just tell your friends about us. It's that easy. Love ya.